Picture this. You're lying on a dusty mattress in your grandmother's garage, listening to your wealthy cousins laugh through the walls of what used to be your childhood home, while they've just told you there's no room inside for the family disappointment. The irony? You actually hold the deed to every square foot of that house they're treating like their personal vacation rental. Sometimes the sweetest justice comes from letting people reveal exactly who they are before you show them who you really are. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The gravel driveway crunched under the tires of my 10-year-old Toyota Camry as I pulled up to the sprawling colonial house that had haunted my dreams for the past 8 years. Magnolia trees lined the circular drive, their white blooms creating a canopy over the red brick facade that had intimidated me as a child, and still managed to make my chest tighten with anxiety. This was Willowbrook Estate, the Henderson family compound, where 3 generations had gathered for annual reunions, and where I, Rebecca Henderson, had always been made to feel like an uninvited guest at my own family's table. The house looked exactly as I remembered it, yet somehow smaller than the mansion that had loomed so large in my childhood memories. 3 stories of Georgian architecture with white columns and black shutters, surrounded by 20 acres of manicured lawns and ancient oak trees. What my relatives didn't know as they prepared for this weekend's festivities was that for the past 6 months I had owned every brick, every blade of grass, and every family secret hidden within these walls. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Trevor. "Becca, you still coming? Mom's been asking about sleeping arrangements. Hope you're okay with the guest room situation being tight this year." I stared at the message, remembering last year's reunion when his mother, my Aunt Patricia, had made it abundantly clear that certain family members should manage their expectations about accommodations. "Some people just need to understand their place in the family hierarchy," she had whispered to my Uncle Charles, not bothering to lower her voice as I walked past. The irony wasn't lost on me that Trevor was warning me about sleeping arrangements at a house I now legally owned. For 8 months, I had been working through my attorney to quietly purchase the property from my late grandmother's estate. The family had assumed the house would pass through the traditional inheritance structure, with Aunt Patricia serving as executor and making decisions about who deserved what. They hadn't counted on my grandmother's final wishes, expressed in a codicil to her will that gave me first right of refusal on the property purchase. I stepped out of my car, smoothing down the simple black dress I'd chosen specifically to avoid drawing attention. Nothing too nice, nothing that would make anyone question the narrative they'd constructed about my life. To them, I was still Rebecca the waitress, Rebecca the college dropout, Rebecca who couldn't hold down a steady relationship or build a stable career. What they didn't know was that while they saw a struggling service worker, I had spent the last 5 years building a portfolio of rental properties across 3 states. The transformation had started after my parents died in that skiing accident, leaving me with nothing but their modest life insurance policy and a burning determination to prove that the family's black sheep could become something more than their expectations. I had taken that $75,000 payout and leveraged it into my first duplex purchase. Then another. Then a small apartment complex. Real estate had always made sense to me in a way that traditional career paths never had. While my cousins were accumulating student loan debt and competing for corporate positions, I was learning about cap rates, cash flow, and the patient accumulation of wealth through property ownership. My company, Magnolia Property Investments, now managed 43 rental units across Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Last year's revenue had topped $800,000, with a personal net worth approaching $2 million. But to maintain my competitive advantage and avoid the family politics that had always surrounded money in the Henderson clan, I had kept my success carefully hidden. Let them think I was barely scraping by while I quietly built an empire they couldn't imagine. The front door of Willowbrook Estate opened before I could knock, revealing Aunt Patricia in all her perfectly coordinated glory. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse and tailored slacks that probably cost more than most people made in a week, her silver hair styled in the kind of elaborate updo that required professional maintenance. Her smile was bright and sharp, the expression she reserved for family members she was obligated to tolerate but didn't particularly want to see. "Rebecca, "Darling," she said, air-kissing my cheeks with the practiced efficiency of someone who had turned social gestures into performance art. "How wonderful that you could make it. I was just telling Charles that we weren't sure if you'd be able to take the time off work." The emphasis on work carried just enough condescension to remind me that in her opinion, waiting tables wasn't a real career worth respecting. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, forcing warmth into my voice. "The house looks beautiful. Grandmother would have loved seeing everyone gathered here again." It was true, though I suspected Grandmother would have been less pleased with how the family had treated her granddaughter over the years. Martha Henderson had been a formidable woman who built her own success in an era when few women had such opportunities. I had always wondered if she saw something of herself in me, something that the rest of the family missed or chose to ignore. Patricia's expression flickered with something that might have been genuine emotion for a moment before the social mask reasserted itself. "Yes, well, she certainly loved these gatherings. Come in, come in. The others are already here, and we're just about to start cocktails on the terrace." As we walked through the familiar hallways, I noticed how little had changed since my grandmother's passing. The same oil paintings lined the walls, the same Persian rugs covered the hardwood floors, and the same sense of old-money elegance permeated every room. What struck me most was how comfortable everyone seemed, how naturally they had settled into treating this place as their own. No one had asked about estate proceedings or legal transfers. They had simply assumed the house would remain available for their use, as it always had been. The voices grew louder as we approached the back terrace, and I could already identify the familiar cast of characters from their conversations. Uncle Charles was holding forth about his latest golf tournament victory, his deep voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been challenged on anything that mattered to him. My cousin Ashley was describing her recent promotion at the marketing firm where she worked, carefully emphasizing the salary increase and corner office that came with the new position. Trevor and his wife Madison were discussing their plans to renovate their kitchen, debating the merits of marble versus quartz countertops, with the casual ease of people who had never worried about affording either option. "Look who's here," Ashley called out as Patricia and I stepped onto the terrace. "Becca, we were just wondering if you'd make it." She rose from her wicker chair to give me a hug that felt genuinely warm, though I caught the quick assessment in her eyes as she took in my appearance. Ashley had always been kinder than some of the others, but even her kindness came with an undertone of pity that made my skin crawl. The terrace was exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits, with its stone flooring and wrought iron furniture arranged to take advantage of the sweeping views across the back lawn. Citronella candles flickered in glass holders, their soft light mixing with the amber glow from the house's interior. A full bar had been set up near the French doors, complete with a selection of top-shelf liquors that would have cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Becca!" Trevor stood up from where he'd been mixing drinks, his face breaking into the genuine smile that had made him my favorite cousin during our childhood years. "I'm so glad you're here. It hasn't been the same without you." He crossed the terrace to wrap me in a bear hug that reminded me of summer afternoons, spent climbing trees and catching fireflies in mason jars. "Good to see you, Trev," I said, returning the embrace. "How's the new house treating you?" I had seen photos of his recent purchase on social media, a modern craftsman-style home in an exclusive Atlanta suburb that had probably cost close to $1 million. "Can't complain," he replied with the casual modesty of someone who had never worried about mortgage payments. "Madison's been redecorating like crazy. You should come visit once we get everything settled." The invitation sounded sincere, though we both knew it was the kind of social pleasantry that rarely translated into actual plans. Madison joined us, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the humid Georgia evening. She wore a sundress that managed to look both casual and expensive, the kind of effortless elegance that came from having unlimited shopping budgets and personal stylists. "Rebecca, hi! Trevor's told me so much about you. How's life in—" She paused, clearly struggling to remember where I lived. "Wherever you're living now?" "Savannah," I supplied, though I actually maintained residences in 3 different cities depending on where my business required my attention. "It's good, keeping busy with work and trying to stay out of trouble." The lie came easily, practiced through years of deflecting questions about my actual circumstances. Uncle Charles approached with 2 glasses of what looked like expensive bourbon, handing one to me with the genial authority he brought to all social interactions. "Rebecca, sweetheart, good to see you. Patricia was just telling me about the accommodation situation this weekend. I hope you understand that we're a bit tight on space with everyone here." I took a sip of the bourbon, noting its smoothness and probable cost while keeping my expression neutral. "Oh, I'm sure we'll figure something out. I'm just happy to be here with everyone." The words tasted bitter compared to the whiskey, but I had learned long ago that family gatherings required a certain amount of performance. "Well, that's the spirit," Charles said, clapping me on the shoulder with paternalistic approval. "Always been a trooper, our Rebecca. Never complains, never expects special treatment. We could all learn something from that attitude." The backhanded compliment was classic Charles, simultaneously praising and diminishing in the same breath. As the evening progressed, I found myself falling into the familiar rhythm of family gatherings, listening to updates about careers and relationships, nodding appreciatively at vacation photos and home renovation plans. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone, including me just enough to avoid overt rudeness while making it clear that my life wasn't particularly interesting or worth discussing in detail. Ashley's husband Derek had joined us from his business call inside, still wearing his suit despite the casual nature of the gathering. He worked in finance and had the kind of aggressive confidence that came from making large amounts of money while producing nothing tangible. "Sorry about that," he said, loosening his tie. "West Coast clients never seem to understand time zones." "What kind of deals are you working on these days?" Trevor asked, and Derek launched into a detailed explanation of commercial real estate transactions that made my own property investments sound like child's play. I listened with genuine interest, recognizing several of the market trends he described from my own research, but kept my observations to myself. Better to let them think I was out of my depth than reveal how much I actually understood about their world. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The sun was setting behind the magnolia trees when Aunt Patricia approached me with the expression I had been dreading all evening. Her smile was bright and sharp, like a cut crystal catching candlelight. "Rebecca, honey, I wanted to talk to you about tonight's sleeping arrangements. I'm afraid we're in a bit of a pickle." I set down my bourbon glass and gave her my full attention, though I suspected I already knew where this conversation was heading. "What kind of pickle?" "Well, you see, we originally thought we'd have the guest rooms worked out perfectly, but then Madison's sister decided to join us at the last minute. And Derek's parents drove down from Charleston, and suddenly we're just completely overbooked." She gestured helplessly, as if the laws of physics had conspired against her accommodation plans. "I see," I said quietly, waiting for her to continue. "Now I've been racking my brain trying to figure out how to make this work for everyone, and I think I've come up with a solution that might actually be perfect for you." Patricia's voice took on the bright, encouraging tone she probably used when explaining to children why they couldn't have what they wanted. "What did you have in mind?" "Well, you remember how grandmother always kept that lovely daybed in the garage workshop? She used it for afternoon naps when she was working on her gardening projects. It's actually quite comfortable, and the garage has that beautiful window overlooking the rose garden. I think it could be quite cozy, actually." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow, though I managed to keep my expression neutral. They wanted me to sleep in the garage. Not just any garage, but the converted workshop space where my grandmother had spent her final years puttering with hobbies, because the family had made it clear she was no longer the authority figure in her own home. "Plus," Patricia continued, warming to her theme, "you've always been so practical and down to earth. I just know you'll make the best of it. And honestly, some of the others might be a bit too high maintenance for that kind of rustic charm." The words practical and down to earth were code for lower expectations and quote to disappointment. Patricia was telling me, in the politest possible terms, that I was the obvious choice for substandard accommodations because my comfort and dignity mattered least. "That's very thoughtful of you to think of me," I replied, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "I'm sure it will be fine." Patricia's relief was visible. "Oh, wonderful. I just knew you'd understand. You've always been such a good sport about these things." She squeezed my arm with genuine affection, apparently convinced that she had solved everyone's problems with minimal fuss. As the evening continued and other family members drifted inside to prepare for dinner, I remained on the terrace, staring out at the gardens my grandmother had loved so much. The irony of the situation was overwhelming. Here I was, being relegated to a garage, sleeping in my own house by people who had no legal right to make such decisions. They were treating me like a charity case while planning to enjoy luxury accommodations in a home I had purchased with money they didn't know I possessed. The cottage cheese and crackers I had eaten earlier sat heavy in my stomach as I considered my options. I could reveal the truth right now, produce the deed, and watch their expressions change from pity to shock to embarrassment. But something held me back. Maybe it was curiosity about how far they would take this disrespect. Maybe it was the strategic advantage of letting them reveal their true natures before I revealed mine. Or maybe it was the simple desire to see justice served with perfect dramatic timing. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared above the magnolia trees, I made my decision. Tomorrow night, when the entire Henderson family was gathered for our traditional final dinner, I would stand up and make an announcement that would change everything between us forever. But tonight, I would sleep in the garage they had assigned me, not as the family failure they imagined I was, but as the property owner who was about to give them a lesson in consequences they would never forget. The garage door opened with a mechanical hum that seemed to echo through the still night air, revealing the space that would serve as my bedroom in my own house. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would reshape everything they thought they knew about family, success, and the girl they had always underestimated. The garage workshop felt like a museum of my grandmother's final years, filled with half-finished projects and the lingering scent of wood stain and lavender sachets. Martha Henderson had converted this space into her sanctuary after the family had slowly but systematically pushed her out of decision-making roles in her own home. I ran my fingers along the workbench where she had crafted birdhouses and painted watercolors, remembering afternoons when she would let me help sandwood or mix colors, while the adults discussed important matters inside. The daybed Patricia had mentioned sat against the far wall, covered with a faded quilt that had probably been beautiful once. A small window above it looked out onto the rose garden, though in the darkness I could only see the ghostly outline of trellises and carefully pruned bushes. Someone had made an effort to clean the space recently, probably one of the housekeeping staff Patricia hired for these gatherings, but dust motes still danced in the beam of my phone's flashlight. I set my overnight bag on the workbench and pulled out my laptop, needing to check on some urgent business matters before settling in for the night. 3 of my rental properties were in the middle of tenant transitions, and I had scheduled maintenance at another complex first thing Monday morning. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was managing a multi-million-dollar business portfolio, while my family assumed I was too incompetent to deserve a real bedroom. My phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. "Hey, saw the light in the garage. You settling in okay? This whole sleeping situation is kinda messed up." His message was followed by another. "Madison thinks we should offer you our room and we'll take the couch in the den. Would that work better?" I stared at the messages, touched by his consideration but knowing that accepting would disrupt the perfect irony of my situation. Trevor had always been the kindest of my cousins, the one who remembered my birthday and asked genuine questions about my life. He didn't deserve to be uncomfortable because his mother had decided I belonged in the garage. "Thanks, Trev, really appreciate it," I typed back. "But honestly, I'm kind of looking forward to the quiet out here. Plus, the workshop has a lot of grandmother's things. Feels like spending time with her memory." It wasn't entirely a lie. Being surrounded by Martha's projects did feel like connecting with the one family member who had always believed I could be more than others expected. His response came quickly. "Okay, but seriously, if you change your mind, just text me. This is supposed to be a family gathering, not some kind of punishment system." If only he knew how accurate that observation was. I put my phone aside and opened my laptop, logging into the secure portal where I managed my property investments. The numbers on the screen told a story my family couldn't imagine. $847,000 in revenue this year, properties in 12 different locations, and a waiting list of potential tenants that stretched into next year. I had built something substantial and profitable while they worried about whether I could afford gas money. A notification popped up reminding me about Monday's conference call with potential investors interested in a historic renovation project in downtown Charleston. The building was a former textile mill that I planned to convert into luxury lofts, targeting young professionals who wanted downtown living with historic character. The initial investment would be $3.2 million, more money than my entire extended family probably made in a year combined. I closed the laptop and pulled out my phone to review the documentation I would need for tomorrow night's revelation. My attorney, James Mitchell, had prepared everything meticulously. The property deed shows my ownership of Willowbrook Estate, financial statements proving my net worth, documentation of the inheritance process that had given me first right of refusal. But most importantly, the eviction notices that were already prepared and legally reviewed. Because the Henderson family's assumption about their continued access to this house was about to become a very expensive mistake. I had discovered 3 months ago that none of them had bothered to establish any legal relationship with the property after grandmother's death. They had simply continued using it as their personal vacation home, assuming that Patricia's role as executor gave them permanent rights. They had never asked about ownership transfer, never inquired about property taxes or maintenance costs, never wondered who was paying for the utilities and landscaping services they enjoyed during their visits. The answer for the past 6 months had been me. I had been quietly maintaining the house they felt entitled to use, while they treated me like a burden who should be grateful for garage accommodations. Through my connections in the real estate industry, I had learned that Aunt Patricia had been telling people she was planning to put the house on the market once the estate was fully settled. She had already contacted several high-end realtors about potential listing prices, describing herself as the decision-maker for the property sale. The plan apparently was to divide the proceeds among the responsible family members while using my parents' deaths as justification for excluding me from any inheritance. What Patricia didn't know was that grandmother had amended her will 6 months before her death, specifically to prevent exactly this kind of manipulation. The codicil gave me sole rights to purchase the property at appraised value, with financing terms that made the transaction possible even before my business had reached its current level of success. Martha Henderson had recognized something in me that the rest of the family missed, and she had made sure I would have the opportunity to claim what was rightfully mine. A sound from outside made me look up from my phone. Through the workshop window, I could see lights still on in several rooms of the main house. Shadow figures moved behind curtains as my relatives settled into their comfortable accommodations, probably discussing tomorrow's planned activities over nightcaps and expensive wine. The casual cruelty of making me sleep in the garage while they enjoyed luxury rooms in my own house was so perfect it almost seemed scripted. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed my business partner, Sarah Chen, calling from the West Coast. Sarah managed the California branch of Magnolia Property Investments and was one of the few people who knew the full extent of my success. "Rebecca, sorry to call so late." Sarah's voice was crisp and professional even at nearly midnight. "I just finished reviewing the Henderson estate documentation you sent me. This situation is incredible. You actually own the house where they're treating you like a charity case?" "Currently sleeping in the garage workshop," I replied, keeping my voice low to avoid being overheard. "They literally assigned me to the garage because there, quote, wasn't enough room in the main house." Sarah's laugh was sharp and delighted. "Oh, this is going to be good. When are you planning to drop the bomb?" "Tomorrow night at dinner. I want everyone present when I make the announcement." I had been planning this moment for weeks, choreographing it like a business presentation that would leave no room for denial or argument. "What's your exit strategy? Are you planning to let them stay for the rest of the reunion, or do you want them gone immediately?" It was a good question, one I had been wrestling with for days. Part of me wanted to enjoy watching them squirm while they processed the reversal of power dynamics. But another part just wanted them out of my space, away from the memories they had tainted with their casual cruelty. "I think I'll give them a choice," I said finally. "They can apologize sincerely and acknowledge how they've treated me, in which case they can finish out the weekend as my guests. Or they can continue acting like they're entitled to make decisions about my property, in which case they'll receive formal eviction notices and have 24 hours to vacate." "Brutal," Sarah said with obvious admiration. "I love it. What about the nice cousin you mentioned, Trevor?" Trevor's different. He's always treated me with respect, and he actually tried to offer me his room tonight when he saw I was sleeping in the garage. He can stay regardless of what the others choose. After ending the call with Sarah, I made myself a cup of tea using the small electric kettle I had found among grandmother's workshop supplies. The familiar ritual was comforting, reminding me of countless conversations we had shared over tea and cookies when I was young. Martha Henderson had been a formidable businesswoman in her own right, building a small empire of local rental properties before women in business were widely accepted. She had always encouraged my entrepreneurial instincts, even when other family members dismissed them as unrealistic dreams. "Remember, Rebecca," she had told me during one of our last conversations before her death, "respect is something you earn and something you demand. Don't ever let anyone convince you to accept less than you deserve just because it's easier for them." At the time, I had thought she was giving me general life advice. Now I understood she had been preparing me for exactly this situation, knowing that the family would test my resolve and my self-worth in ways that would require every ounce of strength I possessed. I settled onto the daybed with my tea, pulling the faded quilt around my shoulders and listening to the sounds of the house settling for the night. Somewhere above me, my relatives were sleeping in comfortable beds, probably not giving a second thought to my accommodations or comfort. They had solved their space problem by relegating the family disappointment to the garage, and now they could focus on enjoying their weekend getaway in what they assumed was their inherited vacation home. Through the window, I could see a few stars emerging between the clouds, their light reflecting off the white roses in grandmother's carefully tended garden. This space had been her retreat from family politics and social expectations, and now it was mine. Tomorrow night, it would become the staging area for the most satisfying confrontation of my life. My phone buzzed with one final message of the evening, this one from Ashley. "Hope you're comfortable out there. See you at breakfast. Patricia is planning that big family brunch she always does. It should be fun." The casual tone of the message, with its complete lack of awareness about how inappropriate the sleeping arrangements were, crystallized everything I felt about my family's treatment of me. Ashley wasn't being deliberately cruel, but her obliviousness to my dignity and comfort was almost worse than outright malice. She genuinely believed that sleeping in a garage was an acceptable solution, as long as everyone was pleasant about it. I turned off the workshop lights and lay back on the daybed, staring up at the ceiling where grandmother had hung dried herbs and garden tools. Tomorrow would bring new indignities and casual dismissals as the family went through their traditional reunion activities. There would be group photos where I was positioned on the edges, conversations about achievements and successes that somehow never included questions about my own life, and probably more comments about my practicality and good attitude in accepting whatever scraps they offered. But tomorrow night, everything will change. Tomorrow night, I would stand up in front of the entire Henderson family and reveal that the granddaughter they had relegated to garage sleeping actually owned every inch of the property they had been treating as their personal resort. I would watch their faces as they realized that their assumptions about my life had been completely wrong, and that their casual cruelty had been directed at someone who held their comfortable weekend in the palm of her hand. The eviction notices were already prepared, sitting in my laptop bag like small bombs waiting to detonate. 24 hours to vacate the premises. No exceptions for family relationships or sentimental attachments. Just cold, legal reality that would teach them exactly what it felt like to have your comfort and security dependent on someone else's goodwill. As I drifted off to sleep in my grandmother's workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects of a woman who had refused to let anyone diminish her worth, I smiled at the perfect justice of my situation. They had given me exactly what I needed: one more night to savor the anticipation of their shock, and one more morning to watch them take their privilege for granted before I pulled the rug out from under their assumptions forever. The garage had never felt more like home than it did that night, knowing that soon everyone would understand exactly whose home it really was. I woke to the sound of car doors slamming and familiar voices carrying across the estate grounds. Pale morning light filtered through the workshop window, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny stars. My phone showed 7:30 a.m., and judging by the activity outside, several more family members had arrived overnight for the reunion's main day of festivities. Stretching muscles that had adapted surprisingly well to the daybed, I moved to the window and peered out at the circular driveway. 3 additional luxury vehicles had joined the collection from yesterday: a gleaming Mercedes SUV, a BMW sedan, and what looked like a brand new Tesla. The Henderson family reunion was reaching full attendance, which meant my audience for tonight's revelation would be complete. Through the main house windows, I could see figures moving around the kitchen and dining areas, probably preparing for Aunt Patricia's legendary brunch spread. The irony wasn't lost on me that they were using my kitchen, my dining room, and my groceries to host their family gathering while I remained hidden away in the garage like some embarrassing secret they needed to manage. My phone buzzed with a text from my property manager, Linda Rodriguez, who oversaw my Tennessee portfolio. "Rebecca, we've got a situation at the Nashville complex. Pipe burst in Unit 204, flooding the apartment below. Need your approval for emergency repairs and temporary relocation costs for both tenants." I quickly typed back authorization for whatever repairs and accommodations were necessary, along with instructions to document everything for insurance claims. Within 5 minutes, I had handled a crisis involving thousands of dollars in property damage while sitting on a garage daybed in my pajamas. The contrast between my actual responsibilities and my family's perception of my capabilities was becoming more absurd by the hour. Another message appeared, this one from my accountant in Atlanta. Q. 3 numbers are finalized. Net profit up 23% from last quarter. You're on track to break $900,000 revenue this year. Conference call Monday to discuss the Charleston Mill project financing? I confirmed the meeting while calculating that my business would generate more profit this quarter than my Uncle Charles made in his entire annual salary as a mid-level bank manager. Yet Charles had spent yesterday evening lecturing me about the importance of financial responsibility and long-term planning, apparently convinced that my service industry background meant I couldn't manage money properly. The workshop door rattled with a soft knock, followed by Trevor's voice. "Becca, you awake? I brought coffee." I quickly pulled on my robe and opened the door to find my cousin holding 2 steaming mugs and wearing an expression of genuine concern mixed with embarrassment. He was dressed casually in khakis and a polo shirt, but even his relaxed weekend attire probably cost more than most people's monthly clothing budget. "Morning, Trev," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "This is really sweet of you." He stepped inside the workshop, looking around at grandmother's tools and projects, with interest rather than judgment. "God, I haven't been here in years. Look at all this stuff she made." He picked up one of Martha's painted birdhouses, examining the delicate brushwork with obvious admiration. "She spent hours out here after grandfather died," I said, settling into the workshop's single chair while Trevor perched on a stool near the workbench. "I think it gave her peace to create things when everything else felt chaotic." Trevor was quiet for a moment, turning the birdhouse over in his hands. "Becca, I want to apologize for this whole sleeping arrangement thing. It's not right, and I should have said something yesterday instead of just texting you about it." "You offered me your room," I reminded him. "That was more than anyone else did. That's not enough, though. The whole situation is messed up." He set down the birdhouse and looked directly at me. "I love my family, but sometimes the way we treat people is based on assumptions about their circumstances. It's not who I want to be." His words hit closer to home than he probably realized. Trevor was articulating something I had struggled with for years: the difference between the Henderson family's public values and their private behavior. They would never admit to being prejudiced or cruel, but their actions revealed a deep-seated belief that some family members deserved more consideration than others. "What do you mean by assumptions?" I asked, curious about how much he had observed over the years. Trevor sipped his coffee, choosing his words carefully. "Like how everyone just decided you were struggling financially without ever actually asking about your life. Or how mom talks about you needing guidance and support when you've been independent since college. Or how people make comments about your job like waiting tables is somehow shameful instead of honest work." I studied his face, seeing genuine frustration and confusion. Trevor had inherited his father's analytical mind, but his mother's emotional intelligence, which made him more perceptive than many of our relatives about family dynamics. "Has it occurred to you that some of those assumptions might be wrong?" I asked gently. "What do you mean?" Before I could answer, voices from outside interrupted our conversation. Through the window, I could see Ashley and Derek walking across the lawn toward their car, deep in animated discussion. Their body language suggested tension, and Derek's gestures were sharp and aggressive. "Wonder what that's about," Trevor muttered, following my gaze. We watched as Derek pulled out his phone and made what appeared to be an angry call, pacing back and forth while Ashley stood with her arms crossed. Even from a distance, their frustration was obvious. "Probably work stuff," Trevor said. "Derek's been stressed about some big commercial deal that's been falling apart. Something about financing issues and problem properties." My attention sharpened. Derek worked for a mid-sized commercial real estate firm that specialized in acquisition and development projects. I had been tracking their activities for months because they occasionally bid against my company for the same properties. "What kind of problem properties?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. I don't know all the details, but apparently they've been trying to put together a portfolio of historic buildings for renovation. "The financing keeps falling through because the properties have more issues than their initial assessments showed." Trevor shrugged. "Derek keeps saying they need to find new investment partners or the whole project will collapse." This was interesting information. My Charleston Mill project was part of a larger historic renovation initiative, and I had been competing with several other investors for the most promising properties in the area. If Derek's firm was struggling with financing, it might explain some of the aggressive bidding strategies I had encountered recently. The workshop door opened without warning, and Aunt Patricia appeared in the doorway wearing a bright smile and a floral dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. Her perfectly styled hair and professional makeup suggested she had been awake for hours, orchestrating the day's activities with her usual commanding efficiency. "Good morning, you two," she said with the kind of forced cheerfulness that always made me nervous. "Rebecca, darling, I hope you slept well. Trevor, your mother is looking for you to help set up the croquet course." Trevor stood immediately, trained by years of family hierarchy to respond to parental summons. "Sure thing, Aunt Patricia. Becca, want to come help? It might be fun." I started to decline, but Patricia's expression brightened with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. "Oh, what a wonderful idea. Rebecca, you could help with the equipment setup. You've always been so good with physical tasks." The phrase, physical tasks, carried the same condescending undertone as yesterday's comments about my practicality. Patricia was categorizing me as the family member suitable for manual labor, the one who could handle setup and cleanup while others enjoyed the actual activities. "I'd be happy to help," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "Just let me get dressed and I'll be right out." After they left, I took my time selecting clothes for the day. Nothing too nice that would contradict their assumptions about my circumstances, but nothing so shabby that I would feel underdressed for my own property. I settled on dark jeans and a simple cotton sweater, clothes that would photograph well when the inevitable social media posts started appearing. As I walked toward the main house, I passed the rose garden, where grandmother had spent so many peaceful hours. The flowers were in full bloom, their fragrance mixing with the morning air to create the kind of perfect moment that belonged in lifestyle magazines. Someone had been maintaining the gardens expertly, probably the same landscaping service I had been paying for without my family's knowledge. The back terrace was bustling with activity as family members prepared for the day's festivities. Madison was arranging fresh flowers in crystal vases, while Ashley set out fine china on the outdoor dining table. Uncle Charles was testing the sound system for what appeared to be a planned presentation or speech, his voice echoing across the lawn as he adjusted microphone levels. "Rebecca," Ashley called out, waving me over to the dining area. Perfect timing. "Could you help me carry out the serving platters from the kitchen? They're pretty heavy." I found myself automatically falling into the role of helpful family member, carrying trays and setting up equipment, while others focused on more visible tasks. It was a dynamic I had experienced at every Henderson gathering for as long as I could remember. The assumption that I would handle whatever needed doing without expecting recognition or thanks. In the kitchen, I encountered two family members I hadn't seen yet: my cousin Bradley's wife Jennifer and Uncle Richard's new girlfriend Monica. Jennifer was Patricia's daughter-in-law, a former sorority president who had parlayed her social connections into a successful event planning business. Monica was at least 15 years younger than Richard, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggested professional beauty treatments were a regular expense. "Oh, good. Another helper," Jennifer said without looking up from the elaborate fruit arrangement she was creating. "Could you start loading the dishwasher? There are already so many dishes from breakfast prep." The casual assignment of kitchen duty felt like a slap, but I bit my tongue and began cleaning up the breakfast mess while Jennifer and Monica discussed their upcoming vacation plans to Europe. Their conversation was filled with references to first-class flights, luxury hotels, and designer shopping that represented more money than most families spent in a year. "The villa in Tuscany has its own vineyard," Monica was saying, photographing her coffee cup against the window light for what was obviously a social media post. "Richard says we might buy a case of their best vintage to bring home." Jennifer nodded approvingly. "That sounds divine. We're thinking about investing in a vacation property ourselves, maybe something in the mountains or near the coast. Bradley says real estate is always a smart investment if you know what you're doing." I nearly laughed out loud at the irony of receiving real estate investment advice while washing dishes in a kitchen I owned. Bradley's understanding of property investment was limited to buying expensive vacation homes for personal use, which was hardly the same as building a profitable portfolio of income-generating assets. Through the kitchen window, I could see more family members arriving for the main reunion activities. Cars continued to pull into the circular driveway, disgorging relatives I hadn't seen in years along with their spouses and children. The Henderson family reunion was approaching full attendance, which meant my evening announcement would have maximum impact. My phone vibrated with a call from James Mitchell, my attorney. I excused myself from kitchen duty and stepped onto the service porch to take the call privately. "Rebecca, I've reviewed the final documentation for tonight," James said without preamble. "Everything is legally sound. The eviction notices are prepared and ready for service, though I want to confirm you understand the implications of this action." "What kind of implications?" "Once you serve formal eviction notices, there's no going back. Your family relationships will be permanently altered, and there could be legal challenges if they decide to contest your ownership claims." James paused. "I'm not trying to dissuade you, just making sure you've considered all the consequences." I looked through the kitchen window at my relatives, watching them enjoy the luxury and comfort of a property they had no legal right to occupy while treating me like hired help. The decision had never been clearer. "I understand the implications," I said firmly. "Proceed with the preparations. I want everything ready for tonight's announcement." After ending the call, I returned to the kitchen to find that Jennifer and Monica had disappeared, leaving behind the remnants of their breakfast preparation and expecting me to finish the cleanup. It was such a perfect metaphor for my family relationships that I actually smiled as I loaded the last of their dishes into the dishwasher. Tonight, the entire Henderson family would learn that the woman they had relegated to kitchen duty and garage sleeping actually held the power to make them all homeless with a single signature. The irony was so perfect it felt like cosmic justice, and I planned to savor every moment of their shock when the truth finally came to light. The croquet course setup revealed everything I needed to know about how this family operated. Within minutes of joining the lawn preparation, I found myself assigned to the most labor-intensive tasks, while others took supervisory roles or handled the skilled work of arranging decorative elements. "Rebecca, could you move those heavy wickets to the far end of the lawn?" Uncle Charles called out, pointing to a pile of iron croquet hoops that probably weighed 30 pounds each. "Your back is younger than ours, and you're used to physical work." Meanwhile, Bradley was carefully measuring distances with a laser device that cost more than most people's monthly salary, while Derek positioned himself as the expert on proper croquet regulations. They debated technical specifications with the seriousness of engineers designing a bridge, completely oblivious to the irony that they were arguing about game rules on a lawn I owned. As I hauled equipment across the manicured grass, my phone rang with a call from Dr. Elizabeth Warren, not the politician but my financial advisor who shared the famous name. Elizabeth managed the investment portfolio that had grown from my initial real estate profits into a diversified collection of stocks, bonds, and commercial paper. "Rebecca, I'm reviewing your Q3 statements before Monday's market opening," Elizabeth said as I stepped behind a large oak tree for privacy. "Your portfolio performance is exceptional this quarter. The tech stocks we discussed have outperformed projections by 12%, and the municipal bonds are providing exactly the stable income stream we targeted." I glanced back at my relatives, who were now debating the optimal placement of croquet starting positions with the intensity of military strategists. "What's the current total value?" I asked quietly. "Just over $2.8 million in the investment accounts, separate from your property holdings and business assets. You're approaching the $5 million net worth milestone we discussed as your 5-year goal." The number hit me like a physical shock. $5 million. I was closing in on wealth that would place me in the top 1% of Americans. Yet my family was making me sleep in a garage because they assumed I couldn't afford a hotel room. "Elizabeth, I need you to prepare a comprehensive financial statement," I said. "Something official that shows the full scope of my assets and income. I may need it for a family matter this evening." "Of course. Should I include the business valuations and projected revenues?" "Everything. I want a complete picture of my financial position, documented and verified." After ending the call, I stood behind the oak tree for a moment, letting the magnitude of my success sink in. Then I walked back to rejoin my relatives, who were still arguing about croquet rules while I carried their equipment. The morning activities continued with the same pattern. I was assigned manual tasks while others handled planning and decision-making. When Patricia decided the outdoor sound system needed repositioning, I found myself crawling under tables to rearrange cables while Derek supervised and offered unhelpful suggestions. When Ashley wanted the dining table settings adjusted, I was the one moving heavy chairs while Jennifer critiqued the aesthetic arrangement. Around 11, a conversation near the garden shed caught my attention. Uncle Richard and Bradley were speaking in low voices, their heads close together in the kind of huddle that suggested confidential information was being shared. "The Henderson Trust portfolio took another hit last quarter," Richard was saying, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Patricia hasn't told everyone yet, but we're looking at significant losses in the tech sector." Bradley's expression darkened. "How significant?" "Enough that the annual distributions are going to be cut by at least 30%, maybe more. Patricia's talking about suspending payments entirely until the market recovers." This was news to me. The Henderson Trust was a family investment fund that grandmother had established decades ago, designed to provide ongoing financial support to her descendants. I had never received a penny from it, with Patricia always finding reasons why I didn't qualify for distributions, but I had assumed it was thriving under her management. "What about the estate proceeds from grandmother's house?" Bradley asked. Patricia said the property appraisal came in higher than expected. "That should help offset the portfolio losses." Richard nodded grimly. "That's the plan. She's already contacted 3 different real estate agents about listing strategies. The house should sell quickly in this market, especially with all the acreage and historic value." I nearly dropped the croquet mallet I was carrying. They weren't just using my house for their reunion. They were actively planning to sell it out from under me. Patricia had been telling the family that she controlled the estate proceeds, and she was positioning the house sale as her solution to the trust's financial problems. "What about Rebecca?" Bradley asked, and my attention sharpened. "Doesn't she have some kind of inheritance claim?" Richard's laugh was dismissive. "Patricia says grandmother left her a small bequest, maybe enough for a down payment on a modest condo somewhere. Nothing that would affect the major estate decisions. Rebecca's never shown any interest in family financial matters anyway." The casual dismissal of my inheritance rights was breathtaking in its audacity. Patricia hadn't just excluded me from trust distributions. She had apparently been telling people that my grandmother had intentionally limited my inheritance because I was too irresponsible to handle significant money. My phone buzzed with a text from my real estate attorney confirming that all documentation was ready for tonight's revelation. The irony was perfect. While my family plotted to sell my house to solve their financial problems, I was preparing to reveal that I already owned it and was about to evict them for trespassing. The croquet tournament began after lunch, with teams organized according to what Patricia called balanced skill levels. In practice, this meant pairing me with the youngest family members while the adults formed their own competitive groups. I found myself partnered with Trevor's 8-year-old daughter Emma and Ashley's teenage son Marcus, both of whom were more interested in their phones than the game. "Aunt Rebecca, why do you live so far away?" Emma asked as we waited for our turn. "Mommy says you work in restaurants. Do you get to eat all the food for free?" The innocent question from a child hit harder than any adult condescension. Emma had been taught to think of me as the family member with the unimportant job, the one who lived far away because she couldn't afford to live anywhere better. I live in different places for work, I told her truthfully. And yes, sometimes I get to try really good food, but mostly I help people with their businesses and properties. Marcus looked up from his phone with mild interest. What kind of properties? Apartment buildings, office complexes, things like that. I help people find good investments and manage their real estate portfolios. It was a simplified explanation, but accurate enough for a teenager. That sounds cool, Marcus said. Like flipping houses on TV? Sort of, but usually with bigger properties and longer-term strategies. I was grateful for their genuine curiosity, such a contrast to the adults' assumptions and dismissals. As the tournament progressed, I found myself genuinely enjoying the company of the younger generation. They asked direct questions without hidden agendas, showed interest in my actual life rather than their parents' version of it, and treated me like a person rather than a problem to be managed. During a break between games, I overheard a conversation that made my blood boil. Patricia was speaking with Jennifer and Monica near the refreshment table, their voices carrying clearly across the lawn. I'm just saying, some people need to understand their limitations, Patricia was saying. Rebecca's always had unrealistic expectations about her place in the family. The garage situation is actually quite generous when you consider her contributions to these gatherings. Jennifer nodded sagely. It's important to maintain boundaries. If you start making exceptions for people who can't keep up financially, it sets a precedent that's unfair to everyone else. Monica, ever the diplomat as the newest family addition, tried to sound more sympathetic. It must be hard for her, though, seeing everyone else doing so well. Maybe she feels left out. Exactly why clear expectations are so important, Patricia replied. If Rebecca understood her role better, she'd be much happier. Some people are just meant to be helpers, rather than leaders. The conversation continued in the same vein, with my relatives dissecting my life and motivations like I was a case study in family management, rather than a human being with feelings and dignity. They had convinced themselves that relegating me to garage sleeping was actually kindness, that limiting my participation in family activities was protecting me from disappointment. My phone rang, providing an escape from their toxic analysis. The caller was my property manager in North Carolina, dealing with a potential new acquisition that required immediate attention. Rebecca, the Asheville complex deal is moving fast, Linda Chen said. The seller wants a decision by Monday morning, and we need to finalize the inspection reports before you commit. Are you available for a conference call this afternoon? I walked toward the edge of the property for privacy, calculating the timing in my head. What time works for the inspection team? 4 o'clock Eastern. The structural engineer found some issues with the foundation that might affect your offer price, but nothing that can't be handled with proper renovation budgeting. The Asheville complex was a 40-unit apartment building that would add substantially to my portfolio, but it required careful analysis of renovation costs versus potential rental income. The kind of complex financial decision that my family assumed I was incapable of making. Schedule the call, I said. I'll be available at 4. After ending the conversation, I looked back at my relatives, who were continuing their croquet tournament with the same casual assumption of superiority they brought to all their activities. By mid-afternoon, the pattern of dismissive treatment had become so consistent that I started documenting it. Every menial task assignment, every condescending comment, every assumption about my capabilities and limitations. By evening, I would have a comprehensive record of exactly how the Henderson family treated the woman they thought was their financial inferior. The most revealing moment came during the traditional family photo session. Patricia had hired a professional photographer to capture the reunion, and she spent considerable time arranging people according to what she called natural family groupings. The core family members were positioned in the center and front rows, while spouses and newer additions were placed strategically around them. I found myself assigned to the back corner, partially hidden behind Uncle Richard, and barely visible in the frame. When I tried to move to a more prominent position, Patricia gently but firmly guided me back to the margin. "This works better for the composition, dear," she said with a practiced smile. "Everyone needs to be able to see, and you're so tall you might block someone important." The photographer, a young woman who clearly recognized the family dynamics at play, gave me a sympathetic look, but didn't interfere with Patricia's arrangements. The final photo would tell its own story, the Henderson family in all their affluent glory, with me as a barely visible afterthought relegated to the edges. As the afternoon faded into evening and dinner preparations began, I retreated to the garage workshop to finalize my plans for the night's revelation. The eviction notices were ready, the financial documentation was complete, and my attorney was standing by for any legal challenges that might arise. Tomorrow morning this house would be empty except for me and whatever family members chose to apologize sincerely for their treatment. The rest would be facing 24 hours to find new accommodations, courtesy of the woman they had forced to sleep in a garage. The irony was so perfect it felt like a gift from my grandmother herself, a final lesson in the importance of never accepting less than you deserve, no matter how much easier it might be for everyone else. The evening began with cocktails on the terrace, as golden hour light painted the estate in warm hues that would have been perfect for a magazine spread. I watched my family settle into their familiar rhythms of conversation and casual luxury, completely unaware that they were enjoying their final hours as guests in my home. The Asheville conference call had gone exceptionally well. The foundation issues were cosmetic rather than structural, and my renovation team estimated we could fix everything for $60,000 while adding over $200,000 in property value. I had authorized the purchase with a cash offer that would close by Wednesday, adding another profitable asset to my growing empire. While I negotiated real estate deals worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, my family had spent the afternoon planning my role in the evening's entertainment. Patricia approached me as I emerged from the garage workshop, clipboard in hand and wearing the expression she reserved for delegating tasks to hired help. "Rebecca, dear, I've organized the dinner service plan," she said, consulting her notes with professional efficiency. "We'll need someone to coordinate the kitchen timing and help serve courses. You've always been so wonderful at that sort of thing." The assignment was delivered as a compliment, but its meaning was clear. While the rest of the family enjoyed dinner as guests, I would be working as unpaid staff in my own dining room. The irony was so perfect I almost laughed. "Of course," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'd be happy to help with the service." Patricia's relief was visible. "Wonderful. The caterers will handle most of the preparation, but family service always feels more special when it's done by someone who cares. You know how to make everyone feel welcome." What I knew was how to make everyone feel superior while I remained invisible, but I simply nodded and accepted her instructions about dinner timing and service protocols. Tonight would be the last time anyone in the Henderson family gave me orders in my own home. As twilight deepened, the full cast of family members gathered for what Patricia had billed as our traditional reunion dinner. The dining room sparkled with crystal and candlelight, the mahogany table that had belonged to my great-grandmother set with china that cost more per place setting than most people earned in a day. I counted heads as people took their seats, Patricia and Charles at the head and foot of the table, Bradley and Jennifer flanking them with the authority of the next generation. Ashley and Derek claimed seats near the center, while Trevor and Madison positioned themselves with their usual diplomatic neutrality. Uncle Richard had brought Monica, who photographed every course for her social media presence. The extended family filled out the remaining chairs, creating a tableau of Henderson prosperity and self-satisfaction. My assigned seat was near the kitchen door, positioned for easy access to serve and clear dishes rather than participate in conversation. It was such a perfect metaphor for my family role that I wondered if Patricia had planned it as a deliberate insult, or if the symbolism was just an unconscious habit. The first course arrived as I moved between kitchen and dining room, ensuring water glasses stayed filled and bread baskets remained stocked. From my service position, I could observe the entire table while remaining largely invisible to the diners themselves. "Before we begin," Patricia announced, tapping her wine glass with a silver knife, "I want to thank everyone for making this reunion so special. Willowbrook Estate has always been the heart of our family, and I'm thrilled to share some exciting news about its future." My hand tightened on the water pitcher I was holding. Patricia was about to announce her plans for selling my house, probably positioning it as wise financial stewardship that would benefit the entire family. "As you all know," she continued, "managing grandmother's estate has been a complex responsibility. The trust portfolio has faced some market challenges recently, And I've been exploring options to ensure long-term financial stability for all Henderson descendants. Murmurs of interest rippled around the table. Several family members exchanged glances that suggested Patricia had been preparing them for this announcement through private conversations. After consulting with financial advisors and real estate professionals, I've decided to list Willowbrook Estate for sale. The property has appreciated significantly, and the proceeds will be reinvested to strengthen the trust portfolio and increase annual distributions to qualified family members. The silence that followed was profound. Even knowing this announcement was coming, hearing Patricia claim authority over my property felt like a physical blow. She was presenting herself as the decision-maker for a house she had no legal right to control, while the actual owner stood 10 feet away refilling water glasses. Bradley was the first to respond. "That's a significant decision, Mom. What kind of timeline are we looking at?" "I'm meeting with listing agents next week," Patricia replied smoothly. "Given the property's condition and location, we should expect multiple offers and a quick sale. I'm hoping to have everything finalized within 90 days. Uncle Richard leaned forward with obvious interest. "What about personal property?" Grandmother had some valuable antiques and artwork. "Everything will be appraised and either sold separately or included with the house sale, depending on what maximizes value," Patricia said. "The goal is to convert every asset into liquid funds that can be properly invested and managed." I moved around the table like a ghost, serving salad courses while my family discussed dismantling my inheritance and selling my home. None of them questioned Patricia's authority to make these decisions. None of them asked about legal documentation or estate proceedings. They simply accepted that she had the right to dispose of family property as she saw fit. "What about accommodations for future reunions?" Ashley asked. "This place has been our gathering spot for decades." Patricia's smile was practiced and reassuring. "We'll use some of the proceeds to establish a reunion fund. We can rent beautiful properties for our gatherings without the burden of maintenance and property taxes. It will actually give us more flexibility and better locations." The conversation continued in this vein, with family members gradually warming to the idea of liquidating the estate. They discussed potential vacation destinations and rental properties with growing enthusiasm, apparently convinced that selling my house would somehow improve their family experiences. I retreated to the kitchen during the main course service, needing a moment to process the audacity of what I was witnessing. Patricia wasn't just stealing my inheritance. She was convincing the family that her theft was actually generous stewardship that would benefit everyone. My phone buzzed with a text from James Mitchell. "Final documentation ready. Are you proceeding as planned?" I typed back, "Absolutely. More motivated than ever." The dinner conversation had moved on to other topics by the time I returned with the roast course. Derek was describing his commercial real estate struggles, carefully omitting the details about financing problems while emphasizing the potential profits of his development projects. "The historic renovation market is incredibly competitive right now," he was saying. "Everyone wants those old buildings with character, but most investors don't understand the complexity of bringing them up to modern standards." I paused in my serving to listen more closely. Derek's company was bidding against me for properties across 3 states, and his casual comments about market conditions revealed more about his business strategy than he probably intended. "What kind of investors are you competing against?" Bradley asked. Derek's expression darkened slightly. "Mostly individual speculators with more money than sense. They come in with cash offers that don't reflect realistic renovation costs, then get stuck with properties they can't afford to fix properly." The description was clearly meant to dismiss investors like me, the individual speculators, who were outbidding his company with superior financial resources and more accurate cost analysis. What Derek didn't realize was that his competition was standing 3 feet away, serving his dinner in a house she owned. "Some of these investors operate through holding companies and shell corporations," Derek continued. "Makes it impossible to know who you're really bidding against or what their actual financial backing looks like." Uncle Richard nodded knowingly. "Probably foreign money or cryptocurrency profits. People with more cash than experience." I almost smiled at their assumption that successful real estate investment required traditional business pedigree, rather than careful analysis and strategic thinking. They couldn't imagine that someone like me might be outsmarting them in markets they considered their professional territory. The evening's entertainment began after dessert, with Patricia organizing parlor games that had been Henderson family traditions for decades. I found myself assigned to scorekeeping and equipment management while others participated in the actual competitions. During a particularly heated round of charades, my phone rang with an urgent call from my West Coast partner. Sarah Chen's voice was excited as she described a new acquisition opportunity that had just become available. "Rebecca, you need to hear this," Sarah said as I stepped onto the service porch for privacy. "The Portland mixed-use complex we've been tracking just came back on the market. The previous buyer's financing fell through, and the seller wants to close quickly." I listened as Sarah outlined the details. 42 residential units plus retail space, prime downtown location, immediate positive cash flow potential. The kind of property that would generate substantial monthly income while appreciating steadily in one of the country's hottest real estate markets. "What's the asking price?" I asked. $4.2 million, but they'll take cash at $3.8. It's a steal at that price, especially with the rental rates in that neighborhood. I calculated quickly in my head. Between my liquid assets and available credit lines, I could structure the purchase easily while maintaining comfortable cash reserves for other opportunities. "Make the offer," I said. "Full asking price, cash, 30-day close." "You're sure? That's a major commitment." "I'm sure. Send me the preliminary financials and I'll review everything tonight after dinner." As I ended the call, I realized I had just committed to purchasing nearly $4 million worth of real estate, while my family assumed I couldn't afford a hotel room. The contrast between their perceptions and my reality had reached levels of absurdity that bordered on the surreal. Back inside, the parlor games had evolved into storytelling, with family members sharing memories and family legends that had been passed down through generations. The tradition always included tales of Henderson business acumen and financial success, stories designed to reinforce family pride and identity. Uncle Charles was holding forth about our great-grandfather's real estate investments during the Depression, describing how Henderson family vision and courage had built the foundation for generations of prosperity. "That's what sets the Henderson family apart," Charles concluded, raising his brandy snifter in a toast. "We understand that real wealth comes from patience, intelligence, and the courage to make smart investments when others are too scared to act." The irony was breathtaking. Charles was celebrating family investment wisdom while completely unaware that the most successful investor in the room was being treated like hired help because he couldn't imagine she might possess the same skills he was praising in his ancestors. Patricia stood to make her own toast, her expression warm with maternal pride as she looked around the table at her assembled family. "To the Henderson legacy," she said, "and to ensuring that future generations understand their responsibilities to family, tradition, and the wise stewardship of the resources we've been blessed to inherit." Everyone raised their glasses except me. I was standing near the kitchen door, holding an empty serving tray, watching my family toast the theft of my inheritance, while positioning themselves as the guardians of family financial wisdom. The evening was winding down, with family members beginning to excuse themselves for the night. Tomorrow would bring farewell brunch and departure preparations, but first, there would be one final family gathering in the main sitting room for nightcaps and final conversations. As I cleared the last of the dinner dishes, Patricia approached me with an expression of satisfied authority. "Rebecca, you've been absolutely wonderful tonight," she said, patting my arm with condescending affection. "Family gatherings always go so much more smoothly when everyone understands their role and contributes according to their abilities." The comment was meant as praise, but it crystallized everything I had endured over the past 2 days. Patricia was congratulating me for accepting subservient treatment while she planned to steal my property and exclude me from family financial benefits. "I'm glad I could help," I replied evenly. "There's actually something I'd like to discuss with everyone before people start heading to bed. Would it be possible to gather everyone in the sitting room for a few minutes?" Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. "Of course, dear. Is everything all right?" "Everything's perfect," I said with a smile that was completely genuine for the first time all weekend. "I just have some news to share that I think will interest everyone." As family members gathered in the sitting room with their nightcaps and comfortable assumptions about their family hierarchy, I excused myself to the garage workshop, to collect the documentation that would change everything between us forever. The moment of truth had finally arrived. The sitting room fell silent as I entered, carrying a leather portfolio that contained the documentation of my actual life. 23 family members sat in comfortable chairs and sofas, crystal glasses of brandy and wine in their hands, surrounded by the warm glow of lamps and the crackling fireplace. They looked like a Norman Rockwell painting of American prosperity, completely unaware that their world was about to shatter. I took my position near the fireplace, the same spot where my grandmother had made family announcements for decades. The symbolism felt appropriate. Martha Henderson's granddaughter, reclaiming her rightful place in a room where she had been marginalized for too long. "Thank you all for staying," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I know it's been a long day, but there are some things you need to know before this reunion ends." Patricia settled deeper into her wingback chair, probably expecting me to make some tearful speech about how grateful I was for their inclusion and tolerance. Her expression was indulgent, prepared to listen patiently to whatever emotional outburst the family disappointment needed to share. "Some of you heard Patricia's announcement about selling Willowbrook Estate," I continued, opening my portfolio and removing the first set of documents. "It's an interesting plan, but there's one small problem with it." I held up the property deed, letting the official state seal catch the firelight. "I own this house. I purchased it 6 months ago for $1.8 million, cash transaction, directly from grandmother's estate. Every brick, every acre, every piece of furniture you've been enjoying this weekend belongs to me." The silence that followed was different from the polite attention they had given me moments before. This was the silence of people trying to process information that contradicted everything they thought they knew about reality. Uncle Charles was the first to respond, his voice carrying the patronizing tone he used when correcting children's misconceptions. "Rebecca, sweetheart, I think there might be some confusion here. Estate matters are complex and sometimes—" "There's no confusion," I interrupted, handing him the deed. "Feel free to examine it. The legal description, the transfer date, the purchase price, my signature as the new owner. Everything is properly documented and recorded with the county." Charles took the document with obvious skepticism, but his expression changed as he read the official language and recognized the authentic legal formatting. His face went pale as the implications began to sink in. "This can't be right," Patricia said, rising from her chair with sharp anxiety replacing her earlier confidence. "I'm the estate executor. All property transactions have to go through me. There's been some kind of mistake." I removed another document from my portfolio. "Here's a copy of grandmother's will, specifically the codicil she added 6 months before her death. It grants me first right of refusal on all real property, with terms that bypass the normal estate process. My attorney can explain the legal precedents if you're interested." Patricia grabbed the will copy, her eyes scanning the pages with growing desperation. I watched her face as she found the relevant clause, and saw the moment when she realized that her carefully planned estate sale was built on a foundation of lies and wishful thinking. "But how?" Ashley asked, her voice small and confused. "How could you possibly afford something like this? The appraisal value alone is over $2 million. "That brings us to the second thing you need to know," I said, enjoying the bewildered expressions around the room. "I'm not a struggling waitress barely making ends meet. I'm the CEO of Magnolia Property Investments, a real estate company that manages over $12 million in assets across 4 states. I distributed copies of my company's financial statements, watching faces change as family members absorbed the revenue figures and profit margins. The documents told a story of systematic success that contradicted every assumption they had made about my life. Last year alone," I continued, "my company generated $847,000 in net profit. My personal net worth is approaching $5 million. The Portland property deal I closed during dinner tonight was worth $3.8 million, which I paid in cash." Derek's brandy glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor with a crash that seemed to echo through the stunned silence. His commercial real estate firm had been struggling with financing issues, while I was buying properties with cash offers that made their leveraged bids irrelevant. "The individual speculators you were complaining about earlier?" I said, looking directly at Derek. "The ones with more money than sense who keep outbidding your company?" "That's me." Magnolia Property Investments has been your primary competition for historic renovation projects across 3 states. Bradley leaned forward, his analytical mind trying to process the numbers. Even if that's true, even if you've been successful in business, where did you get the initial capital? You were working in restaurants when Mom and Dad died. I started with their life insurance money, I replied. $75,000 that I leveraged into my first duplex purchase. While you all assumed I was barely surviving on tips and wages, I was building a real estate portfolio that doubled in value every 18 months. The room erupted in a chaos of voices, as family members tried to reconcile my claims with their long-held beliefs about my circumstances. Some demanded to see more documentation, others insisted there had to be some mistake or fraud involved. Through it all, Patricia sat frozen in her chair, staring at the property deed like it was a death warrant. "This is impossible," Jennifer said, her event planner's mind struggling with logistics that didn't fit her understanding of family hierarchy. "If you own the house, why didn't you say something yesterday when Mom assigned you to the garage?" "Because I wanted to see how far your cruelty would go," I answered honestly. "I wanted to document exactly how this family treats someone they perceive as unsuccessful. I wanted you to reveal your true nature before I revealed mine." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the notes I had been taking all weekend. Kitchen duty assignments. Manual labor during croquet setup, serving dinner while the rest of you enjoyed the meal. Being positioned at the edge of family photos, sleeping in a garage because there wasn't enough room in a house with 8 bedrooms. Each item on my list hit the room like a physical blow. They couldn't deny the accuracy of my observations because they had all witnessed or participated in my marginalization over the past 2 days. "We didn't mean it that way," Madison said weakly. "We just thought we were trying to include you in activities that matched your situation." "My situation?" I asked. "You mean my ownership of the property where you're all staying? My successful business that generates more revenue than most of you make in your careers? My net worth exceeds the entire Henderson Trust portfolio that Patricia has been mismanaging?" The mention of the trust made Patricia flinch visibly. She knew I had been excluded from distributions for years, but she didn't know how much I had learned about her financial misconduct. "Since we're being honest about financial matters," I continued, "let's discuss the Henderson Trust's performance under Patricia's management. 30% losses in the past year. Unauthorized personal expenses charged to the trust account. Conflicts of interest with Bradley's development company, receiving preferential loan terms. I distributed copies of the financial investigation James Mitchell had conducted, watching Patricia's face drain of color as family members absorbed evidence of her mismanagement and self-dealing. These irregularities total over $400,000 in questionable transactions," I explained. "Money that should have been distributed to beneficiaries or invested more conservatively. Instead, it funded Patricia's lifestyle, while she told everyone the trust couldn't afford to support struggling family members." Uncle Richard's voice was barely a whisper. "Patricia, is this true?" Patricia's composure finally cracked completely. "You don't understand the pressures of managing family finances. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions about resource allocation. Some investments don't work out as planned." "Resource allocation?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean excluding me from distributions while using trust money for your personal expenses? You mean telling people I was too irresponsible to receive financial support while you were embezzling family funds?" The accusations hung in the air like smoke from the fireplace. Family members exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their growing understanding of how completely they had misjudged both Patricia's management and my circumstances. Trevor was the first to find his voice. "Becca, I'm so sorry. We've been terrible to you, and you didn't deserve any of this treatment." "Some of you have been terrible," I agreed. "Others have just been willfully blind to what was happening right in front of you." I looked around the room at faces showing various combinations of shock, shame, and anger. Some of my relatives were beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistakes, while others still seemed to be struggling with basic facts. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, removing the final documents from my portfolio. "I'm giving each of you a choice. You can acknowledge how you've treated me, apologize sincerely, and commit to treating me with the respect I deserve going forward. In that case, you're welcome to finish the reunion as my guests. I held up a stack of legal papers that made several people flinch. Or you can continue believing that your assumptions and prejudices were justified, that somehow I deserve to be relegated to garage sleeping and kitchen duty in my own home. In that case, you'll receive formal eviction notices and have 24 hours to vacate the premises. The threat was real and legally enforceable. My attorney had prepared comprehensive eviction documentation that would stand up in any court challenge. "You're joking," Bradley said, though his voice suggested he knew I wasn't. "You can't seriously be threatening to evict your own family." "I'm not threatening anything," I replied calmly. "I'm offering you choices. Stay and apologize, or leave and face the consequences of treating the property owner like hired help." Patricia stood on shaky legs, her authority and confidence completely shattered. "Rebecca, please, we can work this out. Family disagreements shouldn't involve legal action." "This isn't a disagreement," I said firmly. "This is a pattern of emotional abuse and financial manipulation that has gone on for years. You plan to sell my house out from under me while forcing me to sleep in the garage. You embezzled money from a family trust while excluding me from distributions. You turned every family gathering into an opportunity to remind me that I didn't measure up to your standards." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of accumulated cruelty and missed opportunities for kindness. Some family members were crying quietly, others sat in stunned contemplation of their behavior over the years. "I'll give you until morning to decide," I said, closing my portfolio and preparing to leave them with their choices. "Anyone who wants to stay and rebuild our relationship based on honesty and mutual respect is welcome. Anyone who can't accept that the family dynamic has permanently changed should start packing." As I walked toward the door, Trevor called out, "Becca, wait. I want to apologize right now. I want to stay and do better." I turned back to see him standing with tears in his eyes, his voice thick with genuine remorse. I knew what was happening was wrong, and I didn't do enough to stop it. "I offered you my room, but I should have confronted the whole family about how unacceptable this situation was. I'm sorry, and I promise to do better." His apology felt genuine, free of the calculating self-interest that characterized so many family interactions. Trevor had always been different, and tonight he was proving that his kindness went deeper than social politeness. "Thank you, Trevor," I said. "That means more than you know." As I left the sitting room and walked back toward the garage workshop, I could hear the explosion of voices behind me as family members processed what they had learned and debated their options. Some would choose pride over relationships, unable to admit their mistakes or adjust their assumptions. Others might find the courage to acknowledge their failures and commit to genuine change. But regardless of their individual choices, the Henderson family would never again treat me as anything less than an equal. The woman they had forced to sleep in a garage had just revealed that she owned the entire estate, and tomorrow morning would bring a reckoning that would reshape our family forever. The garage had never felt more like a sanctuary than it did that night, knowing that soon it would be the only part of the property where apologetic family members would be welcome to visit the woman they had so dramatically underestimated. I woke before sunrise on my final morning in the garage workshop, though this time by choice rather than necessity. The early light filtering through the window revealed packed suitcases and cleaning supplies that hadn't been there the night before. Someone had been busy making decisions about their future at Willowbrook Estate. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages from family members who had spent the night processing my revelation and debating their options. The messages ranged from heartfelt apologies to angry denials to desperate attempts at negotiation. I scrolled through them while brewing coffee on grandmother's small electric kettle, savoring the irony that I was reading pleas for forgiveness while sitting in the space where they had banished me just 2 days ago. The first message was from Ashley, sent at 2:17 a.m. "Becca, I can't sleep. I keep thinking about how blind I've been to your success and how casual I was about your comfort this weekend. I'm mortified by my behavior. Can we please talk before I make any final decisions?" Trevor had sent a series of messages documenting his family's overnight crisis. Dad and Uncle Richard have been arguing for 3 hours about the trust situation. Mom's been crying since she left the sitting room. Derek's on the phone with his business partners trying to figure out if you're really the competition that's been beating them to properties. But the most revealing message came from Patricia herself, sent at 4:42 a.m. Rebecca, I understand you're angry, but surely we can resolve this privately. Family disputes shouldn't become legal matters. I'm prepared to discuss reasonable adjustments to trust distributions and future accommodations. Please call me before involving attorneys further. The carefully worded message was Patricia's attempt to frame my ownership of the house and documentation of her embezzlement as a family dispute that could be negotiated away. She still couldn't accept that the power dynamic had shifted permanently, that the niece she had marginalized for years now held her financial future in her hands. A soft knock on the workshop door interrupted my reading. I opened it to find Emma, Trevor's 8-year-old daughter, holding a piece of paper and wearing the solemn expression children adopt when delivering important messages. Aunt Rebecca, I drew you a picture, she said, handing me a crayon drawing of what appeared to be a large house with a woman standing in front of it. Daddy explained that this is really your house and everyone was being mean to you. I'm sorry we didn't know. The innocent directness of a child's apology hit harder than any of the adult messages. Emma had absorbed the basic facts without the protective rationalizations that allowed adults to justify their behavior. Thank you, sweetheart, I said, accepting the drawing. This is beautiful. Would you like to come see grandmother's workshop? Emma's eyes widened as she explored the space filled with tools and half-finished projects. Did she really make all this stuff? Daddy says she was really smart about business, like you are. She was incredibly smart, I agreed. And she taught me that sometimes you have to be patient and build things slowly, but you should never let anyone convince you that you're worth less than you actually are. Is that why you bought the house? To show everyone you were worth more? The question was perceptive beyond her years. Partly, I said honestly, but mostly because I loved this place and wanted to make sure it stayed in our family the right way, where everyone is treated with respect. Emma nodded seriously, then brightened. Daddy says if you let us stay, he's going to make sure I always treat people nice, even if I don't know how much money they have. Your daddy is a good man, I told her, and you're going to grow up understanding things that some adults never learn. After Emma skipped back toward the main house, I walked out to the rose garden where grandmother had spent so many peaceful hours. The morning mist was lifting from the carefully tended beds, revealing blooms that had flourished under my care for the past 6 months. This garden, like the house itself, had been thriving under my ownership while my family assumed it was being maintained by Patricia's estate management. The sound of car engines starting drew my attention back to the circular driveway. Through the trees, I could see Bradley loading suitcases into his luxury sedan while Jennifer supervised with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing hasty departures. They had clearly made their choice, prioritizing pride over relationships. My phone rang with a call from Derek, his voice tight with professional strain. Rebecca, we need to talk. I just spent the night reviewing our recent property bids, and if you're really behind Magnolia Property Investments, then you've been losing deals to someone with better financing and more accurate renovation cost estimates, I finished. Yes, that's exactly what's been happening. Jesus Christ. There was a long pause as Derek absorbed the full implications. Do you have any idea how much money my firm has lost trying to compete with your cash offers? Probably about as much as I've made by beating your leveraged bids with superior market analysis, I replied calmly. That's how competitive markets work, Derek. The most efficient operator wins. This is a disaster. My partners are going to want a full review of every deal we've lost in the past 2 years. If they find out I've been getting outmaneuvered by my wife's cousin, who I thought was a waitress. That sounds like a professional development opportunity, I said, unable to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. Perhaps you should consider expanding your understanding of who might be operating successfully in your industry. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Derek alternating between grudging professional respect for my business acumen and personal mortification at his assumptions about my capabilities. He was still processing the cognitive dissonance of being defeated in business by someone he had dismissed as irrelevant. By 8 o'clock, the departure patterns had become clear. Bradley and Jennifer were gone, their car disappearing down the driveway with the haste of people fleeing an uncomfortable situation. Derek had left for an emergency meeting with his business partners, probably to explain how his family connections had compromised his competitive intelligence. But others were making different choices. Ashley appeared on the terrace in casual clothes instead of her usual polished reunion attire, carrying coffee and wearing an expression of determined humility. "Rebecca, could we talk?" she called across the garden. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know how sorry I am." We settled on the stone bench where grandmother used to feed the birds, surrounded by the beauty of a property that Ashley was finally seeing through the eyes of ownership rather than entitlement. "I've been awake all night thinking about every interaction we've had over the past 5 years," Ashley began. "Every time I made assumptions about your circumstances, every casual comment about your job or your apartment, every moment when I should have asked about your actual life instead of projecting my own ideas onto you." Her voice was thick with genuine emotion, free of the calculating self-interest that characterized so many family conversations. This was Ashley confronting the uncomfortable truth about her own behavior, rather than looking for ways to minimize her responsibility. "The worst part is realizing how much I missed," she continued. "While I was feeling sorry for you and making condescending comments about your resilience, you were building something incredible. I robbed myself of the chance to know my cousin as she really is, and I robbed you of the respect and support you deserved." "What made you realize all this?" I asked, curious about the process that had led to such clear self-reflection. Ashley was quiet for a moment, watching a pair of cardinals explore the rose bushes. "Honestly? It was seeing your face last night when you revealed the truth. The way you looked at all of us wasn't angry, exactly. I was disappointed. Like you had hoped we might be better than we turned out to be. That observation was more perceptive than I had expected. Anger would have been easier to dismiss as overreaction or emotional instability. But disappointment suggested that my expectations had been reasonable, and that their failure to meet them represented a genuine moral shortcoming. I keep thinking about how lonely you must have been," Ashley continued. "Achieving all this success and not being able to share it with family because we had already decided you were a failure. Having to hide your accomplishments because we wouldn't have believed them anyway." The loneliness she described had been real, though I had filled it with work and strategic planning rather than dwelling on family relationships. But her recognition of that isolation suggested a deeper understanding of what my success had cost in personal terms. "What do you want from me now?" I asked. "The chance to know who you really are," Ashley replied immediately. "The opportunity to build a relationship based on truth instead of assumptions. And maybe, if you're willing to trust me again, the chance to learn from your success instead of being threatened by it." Her answer felt genuine, free of the transactional undertones that often characterized family conversations about money and status. Ashley was asking for relationship repair rather than position protection. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "But it has to be a real relationship, not a performance designed to maintain access to family events or financial benefits." "I understand. And Rebecca? I want you to know that even if you decided to evict all of us, I would still want to rebuild our relationship. This isn't about staying at the house. This is about becoming the kind of person who deserves your respect." The conversation continued for another hour, covering years of missed opportunities and misunderstood signals. Ashley asked detailed questions about my business development, my investment strategies, and the daily realities of managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio. Her curiosity was genuine rather than performative, driven by authentic interest in my actual life rather than social obligation. Trevor joined us around 10 o'clock, having spent the morning managing family logistics and helping with departure preparations. His presence brought a sense of completion to our conversation, creating a small circle of family members who had chosen accountability over defensiveness. "Uncle Charles and Aunt Louise are leaving," Trevor reported. "They said they need time to process everything before they can have meaningful conversations about moving forward, but they wanted me to tell you that they're grateful you gave them the choice instead of just evicting everyone immediately." "What about your parents?" I asked. Trevor's expression grew complicated. "Dad's staying to help Mom pack. She's struggling with everything that's come out about trust management. I think she knows she crossed legal lines that can't be uncrossed with apologies." Patricia's situation was indeed complex. The financial misconduct I had documented represented potential criminal liability that went beyond family relationship repair. Her embezzlement of trust funds and conflicts of interest with Bradley's business constituted serious fiduciary breaches that could result in prosecution if I chose to pursue legal action. "What's she planning to do?" Ashley asked. "Resign as trustee immediately and cooperate with whatever investigation or restitution process Rebecca decides to pursue," Trevor replied. "She's also prepared to liquidate personal assets to repay the questionable transactions if that's what it takes to avoid criminal charges." The prospect of Patricia facing legal consequences for her financial manipulation was satisfying in abstract terms. But I found myself more interested in establishing new family dynamics than pursuing punishment for past wrongs. "I'll need to discuss the trust situation with my attorney," I said. "But my primary concern is making sure future family financial matters are handled transparently and fairly. If Patricia cooperates with that process, I'm not interested in destroying her life over past mistakes." Trevor's relief was visible. Whatever Patricia's failures as a family leader, she was still his aunt, and he clearly dreaded the prospect of criminal prosecution tearing the family apart even further. By afternoon, the estate had settled into a quieter rhythm. The family members who had chosen to stay were engaging in genuine conversations about relationships and expectations, while those who had left were probably spending their Sunday processing the revelations in their own ways. I used the time to conduct business calls from the comfort of the main house instead of hiding in the garage workshop. The Portland property deal required final documentation review, and my Tennessee manager needed authorization for emergency repairs at the Nashville complex. It felt surreal to handle multi-million-dollar transactions while sitting in my grandmother's favorite armchair, but it also felt right. This was where Martha Henderson had managed her own business affairs, and continuing that tradition seemed like the best possible tribute to her memory. Monica, Uncle Richard's girlfriend, approached me around 4 o'clock with the tentative air of someone entering unfamiliar territory. Her usual social media confidence had been replaced by genuine uncertainty about how to navigate the new family dynamics. "Rebecca, I owe you an apology," she began. "I didn't know you well enough to treat you badly personally, but I definitely participated in conversations where other people were making assumptions about your life. I should have said something instead of just going along with it." Her honesty was refreshing, particularly since her relationship with the family was new enough that she could have easily claimed ignorance of the deeper dynamics. "I appreciate that," I said. "What made you decide to stay instead of leaving with Richard?" Monica's smile was rueful. "Honestly? Because this whole weekend has been the most educational relationship experience I've ever had. Watching how a family treats someone they think has no power tells you everything you need to know about their real values. If Richard can't handle his niece being more successful than he is, then he's not the man I thought he was. And if he can handle it, then maybe we have a future together. But either way, I want to be on the right side of this family divide. What you've built is incredibly impressive, and how you've handled this weekend shows more class and strength than I've seen from anyone else in this family." As evening approached, I found myself in the unusual position of hosting a dinner party in my own home, with family members who finally knew I owned it. The dynamic was completely different from the previous night's service role, with Ashley and Madison helping with meal preparation while Trevor managed wine service, and Monica documented the gathering with social media posts that told a very different story than yesterday's luxury vacation content. Patricia appeared at dinner looking older and smaller than I had ever seen her, her usual commanding presence replaced by the cautious demeanor of someone who understood that their authority had evaporated completely. She took a seat at the table with obvious discomfort, no longer sure of her place in the family hierarchy. "Rebecca," she said quietly, "I want to thank you for allowing me to stay for this final dinner. I know I don't deserve consideration after everything that's happened, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to begin making amends." The conversation that followed was unlike any family dinner I had ever experienced. Instead of performative updates about achievements and acquisitions, we talked about real topics: the mistakes that had damaged relationships, the assumptions that had prevented genuine connection, and the changes that would be necessary to rebuild trust. Patricia was remarkably forthcoming about her financial mismanagement and the psychological drivers that had led to her embezzlement of family funds. Her need to control family resources had grown from insecurity about her own value and fear of losing her position as family matriarch. I convinced myself that I was protecting family interest, she admitted. But the truth is, I was protecting my own importance. If family members like Rebecca could succeed without my guidance and support, then what was my role? What value did I provide? You could have provided encouragement and celebration, Ashley pointed out. You could have been proud of family success instead of being threatened by it. I see that now, Patricia replied. But at the time, Rebecca's independence felt like a criticism of my leadership. If she could build wealth without family support, it suggested that my stewardship wasn't as essential as I needed it to be. The psychological honesty was painful but necessary. Patricia was articulating the insecurity and control issues that had driven years of family manipulation, acknowledging the damage while taking responsibility for her choices. As the evening wound down and family members prepared for their Monday departures, I realized that the Henderson family reunion had accomplished something no previous gathering had achieved: genuine transformation of relationships and dynamics. Trevor and Madison would return to Atlanta with a new understanding of success and family values to share with their children. Ashley had committed to rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of truth and mutual respect. Even Monica's brief exposure to our family drama had provided valuable insights about character and integrity. Patricia would face the consequences of her financial misconduct, but within a framework of accountability rather than vindictive punishment. The trust would be restructured under independent management, with distributions based on need and merit rather than political favoritism. Most importantly, the Henderson family would never again operate on assumptions about success and failure that allowed some members to be marginalized while others enjoyed unearned privilege. As I walked through Willowbrook Estate on Monday morning after the last guests had departed, I felt the satisfaction of justice served and relationships rebuilt on honest foundations. The house was mine legally and morally, but it was also still a family gathering place for relatives who had learned to treat each other with genuine respect. The garage workshop remained exactly as I had left it, with grandmother's tools and projects serving as reminders of her strength and wisdom. But I would never sleep there again as a banished family member. If I chose to spend nights in the workshop, it would be as the property owner seeking solitude in a space filled with happy memories. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. Portland deal officially closed. Congratulations on your latest acquisition and on handling your family situation with such grace. Ready to start looking at the next opportunity? I smiled as I typed my response. Absolutely. But first, I'm going to enjoy being home in a house where everyone finally knows who owns it. The Henderson family reunion had ended with some relationships stronger than ever, and others permanently altered, but all of them based on truth rather than assumptions. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give people is the opportunity to see you clearly, even when that clarity forces them to confront their own failures. But the story didn't end with Monday morning departures. Over the following weeks, the ripple effects of that weekend continued to transform lives and relationships in ways I never could have anticipated. The first major development came exactly 1 week after the reunion, when my attorney James Mitchell called with news about Patricia's situation. She's been more cooperative than I expected, he reported. Patricia has voluntarily submitted to a comprehensive financial audit and provided documentation for every questionable transaction over the past 5 years. The audit revealed that the trust mismanagement was even more extensive than my initial investigation had uncovered. Patricia had been treating the Henderson Trust like her personal bank account for nearly a decade, funding everything from her kitchen renovation to her annual European vacations. The total amount of improperly diverted funds approached $600,000. But what surprised me most was Patricia's response to these revelations. Instead of hiring expensive attorneys to fight the charges, she had liquidated her investment portfolio and put her own house on the market to begin immediate restitution payments. The woman who had spent years protecting her position and privilege was now voluntarily dismantling her own financial security to make amends for her misconduct. She asked me to tell you something, James continued. Patricia said she finally understands what your grandmother was trying to teach the family about earning respect rather than demanding it. She wants to rebuild her relationship with everyone starting from zero, with no assumptions about deserving forgiveness or consideration. The transformation was remarkable, though I remained cautiously optimistic about its permanence. Decades of controlling behavior couldn't be reversed overnight, but Patricia's willingness to face serious financial consequences suggested genuine commitment to change. The second major development involved Derek's commercial real estate firm. 3 weeks after the reunion, his business partner Michael Hernandez contacted me directly with a proposal that left me speechless. "Derek told us about your real estate portfolio and your track record in competitive bidding," Michael explained during our phone conversation. "We've been hemorrhaging deals to Magnolia Property Investments for 2 years, without realizing we were competing against someone with superior market analysis and financing capabilities." Instead of viewing me as the enemy who had been destroying their profit margins, Derek's firm wanted to explore partnership opportunities. They had extensive expertise in commercial development but lacked the liquid capital and strategic patience that had made my investments so successful. "We're proposing a joint venture structure," Michael continued. "Your financing and acquisition expertise combined with our development and management experience. Derek says the family connection would ensure trust and communication that's often missing in business partnerships." The irony was exquisite. Derek, who had spent the reunion weekend dismissing my capabilities while complaining about mysterious competitors, was now proposing to merge his business interests with mine. His firm's financial struggles had forced him to recognize that the quote, individual speculator with more money than sense was actually a sophisticated investor whose success could benefit them all. I agreed to a preliminary meeting, curious to see how Derek would navigate the cognitive dissonance of asking for help from someone he had recently relegated to garage sleeping. The partnership might prove mutually beneficial, but it would also serve as an ongoing reminder of how dramatically his assumptions about family capability had been wrong. The third significant development came from an unexpected source: Monica, Uncle Richard's girlfriend, who had apparently been conducting her own investigation into Henderson family dynamics since the reunion. "I broke up with Richard," she announced during a surprise visit to Willowbrook Estate 6 weeks after the gathering. "Not because of the money stuff, but because of what I learned about his character when he thought you were powerless." Monica had spent considerable time reviewing social media posts and family communications from previous reunions, documenting a pattern of dismissive treatment that extended far beyond the recent weekend. Her analysis revealed years of subtle cruelty and exclusion that painted a disturbing picture of family values. "The way he talked about you when he thought you couldn't affect his life showed me exactly who he really is," she explained as we walked through grandmother's rose garden. "Richard isn't a bad person, but he's someone who treats people differently based on what they can do for him. That's not the foundation I want for a long-term relationship." Monica's decision to prioritize character over convenience impressed me more than any of the tearful apologies I had received from family members. She had no obligation to choose sides in family disputes, but she had recognized important principles and acted on them despite personal cost. "I'm thinking about starting my own business," she continued. "Event planning and social media management for small companies. I was wondering if you might have any advice about entrepreneurship, or if any of your business contacts might need those services." The request was professional rather than personal, based on respect for my expertise rather than family obligation. Monica had apparently decided that learning from my success was more valuable than maintaining her relationship with Uncle Richard. I spent the afternoon sharing business development strategies and connecting her with several contacts who were expanding their marketing efforts. By evening, Monica had scheduled 3 client meetings and was planning her transition from social media influencer to business owner. The most emotionally significant development involved Emma, Trevor's 8-year-old daughter, who had apparently been processing the reunion events in her own thoughtful way. 2 months later, Trevor called with a story that brought tears to my eyes. "Emma's teacher asked the class to write about someone they admired," Trevor said. "She wrote about you, but not because of the money or the house. She wrote about how you were kind to people even when they were mean to you, and how you taught her that being smart about business is just as important as being smart about school." Emma's essay, which Trevor read to me over the phone, demonstrated a child's clear understanding of principles that many adults struggled to grasp. She had absorbed lessons about dignity, forgiveness, and the difference between success and worth that would serve her well throughout her life. "She wants to know if you would come to her school's career day," Trevor continued. "She told her teacher that her Aunt Rebecca owns lots of buildings and helps people have nice places to live." The teacher is very interested in having a successful female entrepreneur speak to the class. The invitation represented something profound. The next generation of Henderson family members learning to see me as someone worthy of admiration rather than pity. Emma's clear vision of my accomplishments, unfiltered by adult prejudices and assumptions, suggested that the family's future could be built on entirely different foundations than its past. The Career Day presentation became one of the most rewarding experiences of my business life. Standing in front of 30 elementary school students, explaining how real estate investment works and why helping people find good homes was important, reminded me of why I had started building wealth in the first place. Success without purpose was just accumulation, but success with meaning could transform communities and lives. During the question and answer session, one little boy asked the question that cut straight to the heart of everything. "Ms. Henderson, why do you think some grown-ups don't believe kids can be really smart about things?" The question was clearly inspired by Emma's stories about family assumptions and dismissive treatment. I looked at these bright, curious faces and saw potential that deserved encouragement rather than limitation. "Sometimes adults forget that being smart isn't about how old you are or where you work," I replied. "It's about paying attention, asking good questions, and never letting anyone convince you that you can't learn something new. The smartest people I know are the ones who keep growing and changing no matter how old they get." The children nodded solemnly, absorbing a lesson that many adults never learned. Emma beamed with pride, clearly understanding that her aunt's success represented possibilities for her own future rather than barriers to family connection. 6 months after the reunion, I received a letter that completed the transformation cycle in the most unexpected way. The envelope was addressed in careful handwriting I didn't recognize, with a return address from an assisted living facility in Florida. Inside was a note from Margaret Hopkins, my grandmother's former housekeeper, who had worked at Willowbrook Estate for over 20 years before retiring to care for her own aging mother. "Dear Miss Rebecca," the letter began, "I heard from my cousin who still works in the area about what happened at your family reunion. I wanted you to know that your grandmother would have been so proud of how you handled yourself and how you've honored her memory." Margaret's letter continued with stories I had never heard about my grandmother's own struggles with family expectations and financial independence. Apparently, Martha Henderson had faced similar dismissive treatment from relatives who couldn't accept a woman's business success in her era. "Your grandmother used to say that the hardest part of building something valuable wasn't the work itself, but convincing people to see you clearly instead of seeing their own limitations," Margaret wrote. "She always believed you had inherited her gift for seeing opportunities that others missed, but she worried that the family would try to diminish your vision the way they had tried to diminish hers." The letter included a small wrapped package containing a piece of jewelry I had never seen before. A simple gold pendant with an engraved magnolia flower, accompanied by a note in my grandmother's handwriting. "For Rebecca, when she discovers that she's stronger than she knows and more capable than they believe. The magnolia blooms beautifully even when others think the soil isn't rich enough. Wear this and remember that worth isn't determined by other people's assumptions. Love always, grandmother." The timing of the gift's arrival, delivered through a caretaker who had preserved it for years, felt like cosmic confirmation that my choices had been right. Grandmother had somehow anticipated this exact situation and provided guidance that reached me at the perfect moment. As I fastened the pendant around my neck, I felt the completion of something important. The garage workshop where I had been banished was now my chosen retreat space. The house they had assumed I couldn't afford was the foundation of my growing real estate empire. The family relationships they had taken for granted were now rebuilt on respect and honesty. But most importantly, the woman they had dismissed as a failure was now someone the next generation would grow up admiring as an example of what was possible when you refused to accept other people's limitations as your own reality. The Henderson family reunion had taught us all that assumptions about worth and capability are dangerous things, but the willingness to challenge those assumptions and grow beyond them is what transforms families, businesses, and individual lives. Standing in my grandmother's rose garden on a warm autumn evening, wearing her magnolia pendant and surrounded by the beauty of a property I had earned through patience and strategic thinking, I realized that the sweetest victory wasn't proving I was right about my own worth. The sweetest victory was watching people choose to become better than they were, and knowing that the next generation would inherit a family legacy built on encouragement rather than limitation, on truth rather than assumption, and on the understanding that respect is something you earn by how you treat others, especially when you think they have nothing to offer you in return. But the transformations continued to unfold in ways that surprised even me. 8 months after the reunion, I received a call that would challenge my own assumptions about forgiveness and second chances. "Rebecca, it's Bradley." The voice was subdued, lacking the confident authority I remembered from family gatherings. "I know I have no right to ask this, but I need help, and I think you might be the only person who can provide it." The request was so unexpected that I nearly hung up. Bradley had been among the first to leave the reunion weekend, choosing wounded pride over accountability. His commercial development company had been struggling even before our family revelations, but apparently the situation had deteriorated significantly since then. "My business is failing," he continued, his voice tight with the kind of desperation that comes from watching years of work dissolve. "The projects we had lined up fell through when our primary investor discovered some irregularities in our financial reporting. Turns out having a mother who embezzled family trust funds doesn't inspire confidence in potential business partners." The irony was stark. Bradley's association with Patricia's financial misconduct was destroying his professional reputation, while my ownership of substantial legitimate assets continued to open new opportunities. The family hierarchy that had once elevated him above me had completely reversed. "What kind of help are you looking for?" I asked, curious despite my lingering resentment about his treatment of me. "Honestly, I need someone to vouch for my integrity to potential investors. Someone with an impeccable financial reputation who knows my work ethic despite our personal history. I know it's asking a lot after how I treated you, but you're the only family member with the business credibility to make a difference." The request was both humbling and vindicating. Bradley was acknowledging that my success had surpassed his own, that my reputation in the business community carried more weight than his established connections. But more importantly, he was asking for help based on merit rather than family obligation. "Tell me about the projects," I said after a long pause. "What kind of developments are you trying to save?" Bradley's voice brightened with cautious hope as he described a mixed-use complex in downtown Charlotte that would provide affordable housing alongside retail space. The project had social impact potential that aligned with my own values about responsible property development. "The financing structure is solid, and the market analysis shows strong demand," he explained. "But investors want character references and co-signers with proven track records. Without that backing, 60 construction jobs disappear, and the city loses a development that could revitalize an entire neighborhood." I found myself genuinely interested in the project details, recognizing the kind of strategic opportunity that had driven my own success. Bradley might have treated me poorly at the reunion, but his professional capabilities had never been in question. "I'll review your documentation," I said finally. "If the fundamentals are sound and the social impact justifies the investment, I'm willing to consider providing financial backing. But any partnership would require complete transparency and shared decision-making authority." The conversation that followed revealed a Bradley I had never seen before. Humble, grateful, and genuinely committed to learning from his mistakes. The reunion weekend had forced him to confront not just his assumptions about me, but his own approach to relationships and business ethics. 3 weeks later, I found myself co-signing a $2.3 million construction loan and taking a minority ownership position in Bradley's development company. The Charlotte project became the first in what would evolve into a broader partnership focused on affordable housing initiatives across the Southeast. Working with Bradley on professional terms rather than family dynamics proved surprisingly effective. His development expertise complemented my financing capabilities, while our shared understanding of family dysfunction created an unusual foundation of mutual respect. The most unexpected development came from Ashley, who had maintained regular contact since the reunion but surprised me with a proposal that went far beyond family relationship repair. "I want to write a book about what happened," she announced during one of our monthly coffee meetings at a cafe near my Savannah office. "Not just about the reunion weekend, but about the broader themes of family assumptions, hidden success, and the courage to demand respect." Ashley had been documenting her own transformation process, recording insights about unconscious bias and the psychology of family hierarchies. Her event planning background had given her a unique perspective on social dynamics and the ways people revealed their true values through their treatment of others. "I think our story could help other families recognize these patterns before they cause permanent damage," she continued. "And I think it could inspire people who are building success quietly to have the courage to claim the recognition they deserve." The book project became a collaboration that deepened our rebuilt relationship while creating something meaningful for a broader audience. Ashley's writing captured the emotional complexity of family transformation, while my business experience provided practical frameworks for readers facing similar challenges. Hidden in Plain Sight, When Family Success Stories Surprise Everyone, was published 18 months after the reunion and became an unexpected bestseller in the family psychology and personal finance genres. The book tour and media interviews that followed gave us platforms to discuss the intersection of family relationships and financial success in ways that resonated with readers nationwide. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact came from an initiative that emerged from Emma's continued engagement with my story. Now 10 years old, and even more thoughtful than she had been at 8, Emma had developed a passionate interest in financial literacy and entrepreneurship education for young people. "Aunt Rebecca, why don't they teach kids about starting businesses in elementary school?" she asked during one of our regular mentoring sessions. "If I had known about real estate investment when I was younger, I could have been saving allowance money for my first property down payment." Her question sparked an idea that would become the Henderson Foundation for Youth Financial Education, a nonprofit organization focused on introducing entrepreneurship concepts to students in underserved communities. Emma became our youngest board member and most effective spokesperson, articulating the importance of financial education with the clarity that only children possess. The Foundation's pilot program launched in 5 elementary schools across Georgia, teaching 4th and 5th graders about budgeting, saving, investing, and basic business principles. The curriculum included real-world simulations, where students managed virtual property portfolios and learned about cash flow, market analysis, and strategic planning. "We're not trying to create a generation of real estate moguls," I explained to education officials who initially questioned the program's age-appropriate nature. "We're teaching critical thinking skills and financial literacy that will serve these students regardless of their career paths. Most importantly, we're showing them that success is achievable through education and strategic thinking rather than luck or family connections." The program's success exceeded our most optimistic projections. Students demonstrated remarkable aptitude for financial concepts when presented in engaging, age-appropriate formats. More importantly, teachers reported increased confidence and ambition among participating students, particularly those from families with limited financial resources. Trevor, who had become the Foundation's volunteer coordinator, regularly shared stories about student breakthroughs that reminded us why this work mattered. "One of the 5th graders approached me after yesterday's session," he reported during a Foundation board meeting. "She said she finally understood why her parents were always stressed about money, and she wanted to learn how to help them make better financial decisions. This 10-year-old is thinking about family financial planning because we taught her that money management is a skill anyone can develop." The Foundation work also attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Dr. Sarah Williams, a behavioral economist at Georgia Tech, reached out to discuss research collaboration opportunities focused on childhood financial education and its long-term impact on economic mobility. "Your program is producing measurable changes in student attitudes toward financial planning and business ownership," Dr. Williams explained during our initial meeting. "We'd like to conduct longitudinal studies tracking these students through high school and college to document the program's effectiveness." The research partnership added academic credibility to our educational approach while providing data that could influence policy discussions about financial literacy requirements in public schools. Within 2 years, similar programs were being piloted in 12 states, with funding from foundations and government agencies interested in addressing economic inequality through education. Patricia's involvement in the Foundation work marked the completion of her personal transformation journey. After completing restitution payments for her trust fund mismanagement, she had volunteered to coordinate the Foundation's fundraising efforts, using her social connections for positive impact rather than personal advancement. "Working with these students reminds me why financial stewardship matters," Patricia reflected during one of our quarterly board meetings. "Seeing their excitement about learning business principles makes me realize how much damage I did by excluding family members from financial education and opportunities." Her fundraising efforts proved remarkably effective, partly because her personal story of accountability and redemption resonated with donors who appreciated second chances and genuine transformation. Patricia had discovered that earning respect through service was more fulfilling than demanding deference through authority. The Foundation's annual gala became a Henderson family tradition that replaced our previous reunion format. Instead of gathering to reinforce existing hierarchies and assumptions, we now came together to celebrate student achievements and plan expanded educational initiatives. Emma, now 12 and preparing for middle school, served as the gala's keynote speaker, sharing insights about financial literacy and entrepreneurship that impressed audiences of adults who had decades more life experience. "My family taught me that success isn't about proving you're better than other people," Emma told the audience during her most recent presentation. "Success is about building something valuable that helps other people succeed too." That's what my Aunt Rebecca showed us, and that's what we're trying to teach students through this program. As I listened to Emma articulate principles that had taken me years to fully understand, I marveled at how completely our family dynamics had transformed. The girl who had once drawn pictures to apologize for adult cruelty was now leading educational initiatives that would impact thousands of young lives. The garage workshop at Willowbrook Estate had been converted into the Foundation's Curriculum Development Center, where teams of educators and business professionals collaborated on age-appropriate materials that made complex financial concepts accessible to elementary students. The space where I had once been banished now served as the headquarters for an organization that would help countless young people avoid the assumptions and limitations that had once constrained my own family relationships. Standing in that transformed workshop 5 years after the reunion, surrounded by educational materials and student artwork celebrating entrepreneurship and financial wisdom, I reflected on how much had changed and how much we had all learned about the difference between inherited privilege and earned respect. The woman who had been forced to sleep in a garage had become not just a successful business owner, but a catalyst for family transformation and educational innovation that would influence generations of young people to see possibilities where others saw limitations. Sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones that lift others up while lifting yourself, creating ripples of positive change that extend far beyond personal vindication into lasting impact on communities and families who deserve the chance to discover their own hidden potential. But the story took another unexpected turn when I received a phone call that would challenge everything I thought I knew about family dynamics and forgiveness. The caller was someone I hadn't heard from since that fateful reunion weekend 7 years earlier. "Rebecca, this is Uncle Richard." The voice was weathered, older than I remembered, carrying the weight of someone who had spent considerable time reflecting on past mistakes. "I know I have no right to reach out after all these years of silence, but I need to tell you something important." I listened with cautious curiosity as Richard explained that he had spent the past several years in therapy, working through the psychological patterns that had led him to treat family members differently based on perceived status and financial success. His relationship with Monica had ended not because of her ultimatum, but because her clear moral vision had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own character. "Monica was right about who I was," Richard continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I treated you poorly because I thought you couldn't affect my life in any meaningful way. When I learned about your success, my first instinct wasn't to celebrate your achievements or apologize for my behavior. It was to feel threatened and embarrassed that I had misjudged someone so completely. The honesty was uncomfortable but necessary." Richard was articulating the psychological dynamics that had driven years of family dysfunction, acknowledging the toxic mindset that treated relationships as transactional arrangements based on perceived mutual benefit. "I've been following the Foundation's work through local news coverage," he said. "Seeing what you've built, not just financially, but in terms of educational impact and family transformation, has made me realize how much potential I wasted by focusing on hierarchy instead of genuine connection." Richard's call led to a series of conversations that explored the broader implications of family assumptions and their impact on individual development. His therapy work had included extensive analysis of childhood family dynamics and the way economic anxiety could manifest as controlling behavior toward relatives perceived as vulnerable. "My therapist helped me understand that my dismissive treatment of you wasn't really about your circumstances," Richard explained during one of our phone sessions. "It was about my own insecurity and fear of irrelevance. If family members could succeed without my guidance or approval, what value did I provide? What was my role in the family structure?" These insights paralleled Patricia's earlier revelations about control and family authority, suggesting that the reunion weekend had exposed systemic patterns rather than individual character flaws. Multiple family members had been operating from similar psychological frameworks that prioritized hierarchy maintenance over genuine relationship building. Richard's transformation process culminated in an unexpected request that would test the limits of family reconciliation. "I want to make amends through action rather than just words," he said during a call 6 months after our initial conversation. "I've been working with a nonprofit organization that provides financial literacy education to senior citizens who were never taught money management skills. Many of them are struggling with retirement planning and basic budgeting because no one ever explained these concepts in accessible terms." The organization, called Golden Years Financial Wisdom, served low-income elderly populations who had worked their entire lives without accumulating significant savings or understanding investment principles. Richard had been volunteering as a counselor, using his banking background to help seniors navigate Social Security benefits, Medicare options, and basic financial planning. "I was wondering if the Henderson Foundation might consider expanding into intergenerational programming," Richard continued. "Imagine students from our elementary school programs partnering with senior citizens to learn financial concepts together. The kids could share what they've learned about business and investment, while the seniors could provide life experience and practical wisdom about budgeting and long-term planning." The proposal was brilliant in its simplicity and potential impact. Intergenerational programming could address educational gaps for both age groups while creating meaningful connections between young people and isolated seniors. The Foundation's curriculum would gain real-world perspective, while elderly participants would receive patient, enthusiastic tutoring from students excited to share their knowledge. Emma, now 13 and increasingly involved in Foundation strategic planning, was immediately enthusiastic about the intergenerational initiative. "Uncle Richard is right about the teaching opportunity," she said during our next board meeting. "When I explain compound interest to my friends, I understand it better myself. If we're teaching seniors about investment basics, we'll have to really master the concepts ourselves." The pilot program launched 6 months later in 3 cities, pairing Foundation-trained students with senior citizens in structured learning environments that emphasized mutual respect and shared discovery. The results exceeded every expectation we had established. Students gained confidence and communication skills by teaching concepts to appreciative adult learners, while seniors acquired financial knowledge that improved their daily lives and long-term security. More importantly, both groups developed meaningful relationships that bridged generational divides and created ongoing support networks. Richard's involvement in the program marked his genuine reintegration into family activities, but on terms that emphasized contribution rather than authority. His banking expertise proved valuable for curriculum development, while his personal transformation story resonated with adult learners who had also experienced late-life revelations about personal growth possibilities. The success of the intergenerational program attracted national attention from aging advocacy organizations and educational policy researchers. Dr. Maria Rodriguez from the National Council on Aging contacted us about expanding the model to additional communities and studying its impact on both youth development and senior citizen financial security. "Your program is addressing 2 significant social issues simultaneously," Dr. Rodriguez explained during our collaboration planning session: financial illiteracy among young people and social isolation among seniors. The intergenerational component creates natural support systems that persist beyond the formal educational sessions. The research collaboration led to federal funding opportunities that allowed the Henderson Foundation to expand operations into 15 additional states. Richard coordinated the senior citizen recruitment efforts, using his therapy-developed communication skills to build trust with elderly participants who were often skeptical of financial education programs. But the most meaningful development in our family's continued evolution came from an unexpected source: Derek, whose initial business crisis had eventually led to a complete career transformation. "I'm leaving commercial real estate," Derek announced during a surprise visit to the Foundation offices 3 years after the intergenerational program launch. "I've been accepted into a master's degree program in nonprofit management and social entrepreneurship. I want to start an organization focused on affordable housing development for families transitioning out of poverty." Derek's decision represented a fundamental shift in values and priorities that traced directly back to the reunion weekend revelations. His experience of being outmaneuvered by my superior business strategy had forced him to reevaluate his approach to success and competition. Losing those deals to your company was the best thing that ever happened to my career perspective, Derek continued. I realized I was so focused on maximizing profit that I had lost sight of the social impact potential in property development. Your affordable housing partnerships with Bradley showed me a different model for success. Derek's new organization, Communities First Development, would focus specifically on mixed-income housing projects that prevented gentrification while providing stable homes for working families. His commercial real estate experience provided valuable industry knowledge, while his personal transformation story created credibility with community organizations and social impact investors. The foundation provided seed funding for Communities First Development, creating another layer of family collaboration focused on addressing housing inequality and economic mobility barriers. Derek's projects would eventually house over 500 families while creating construction and property management jobs for community members. Jennifer, Derek's wife, found her own path to meaningful contribution through the foundation's expanded programming. Her event planning background proved essential for organizing community engagement activities and fundraising events that brought together diverse stakeholders around shared social impact goals. I spent years planning luxury events for people who already had everything they needed, Jennifer reflected during one of our quarterly family gatherings. Using those same skills to create connections between students, seniors, community leaders, and social investors feels like the work I was meant to be doing all along. The Foundation's annual impact report, published 7 years after that transformative reunion weekend, documented achievements that none of us could have imagined when I first revealed my property ownership in the sitting room of Willowbrook Estate. Over 12,000 elementary students had completed financial literacy programming across 18 states. The intergenerational initiative had served 3,400 senior citizens, while creating 8,700 mentoring relationships between youth and elderly participants. Communities First Development had completed 42 affordable housing projects, providing stable homes for 1,847 families. But the statistics only captured part of the transformation story. The Henderson Foundation had become a catalyst for family relationship rebuilding based on shared values and collaborative impact rather than hierarchy and assumed authority. Emma, now 16 and preparing for college with plans to study social entrepreneurship and public policy, had evolved into a sophisticated advocate for youth financial education and intergenerational programming. Her TED Talk about childhood financial literacy, delivered when she was 15, had been viewed over 800,000 times and sparked educational policy discussions in multiple countries. The most important thing my family taught me, Emma told audiences during her speaking engagements, is that success isn't about accumulating wealth or status. Success is about using whatever resources and talents you have to create opportunities for other people to discover their own potential. The garage workshop at Willowbrook Estate had been designated as a National Historic Site for Financial Education Innovation, recognizing its transformation from a space of family exclusion to the birthplace of programming that had influenced educational policy and social entrepreneurship across multiple continents. Tours of the facility included the original daybed where I had been forced to sleep, now preserved as a reminder that circumstances don't define potential, and that the most powerful transformations often begin in the most unlikely places. Patricia, now in her 70s and serving as the Foundation's Director of Volunteer Coordination, often led these tours with the authority of someone who had experienced profound personal transformation and wanted to share those lessons with others. This room represents the danger of assumptions and the power of persistence, Patricia would tell visitors, standing next to the workbench where my grandmother had crafted projects while being marginalized by her own family. Rebecca's success wasn't hidden because she was secretive. It was hidden because we chose not to see it. The most important lesson for families, organizations, and communities is to look beyond your assumptions and recognize the potential that might be developing right in front of you. Monica, who had eventually started her own marketing consultancy and maintained friendship connections with several family members, occasionally joined these educational sessions to provide perspective from someone who had observed the family dynamics as an outsider. Character reveals itself through how people treat others when they think those relationships don't matter, Monica would explain to business leadership groups who visited the Foundation to study organizational transformation principles. Rebecca's family treated her poorly because they assumed she couldn't affect their lives. The moment they learned about her actual success and influence, their behavior changed completely. Real character is consistent regardless of perceived power dynamics. As I stood in the transformed garage workshop on the 10-year anniversary of that reunion weekend, surrounded by curriculum materials and student artwork celebrating financial literacy and entrepreneurship, I marveled at the journey that had brought us from family dysfunction to national educational impact. The woman who had been forced to sleep in a garage had not only claimed her rightful place in the family hierarchy, but had used that experience to create systemic change that would influence thousands of families and communities for generations to come. The most profound victory wasn't proving my worth to people who had underestimated me. The most profound victory was transforming family pain into community healing, personal vindication into educational innovation, and individual success into collective empowerment for young people who deserved the chance to build their own definition of achievement without limitation or assumption. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.